duties, and more. Defense diplomacy operates within the broader foreign policy context and in wide-ranging areas and fields, in different forms and foci. Distinguished presenters will enlighten us on these with Bangladesh perspectives and their recommendatory highlights. We'll now listen to the presenters. The first presenter is Mr. A.S.M. Ali Ashraf, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, and his theme of presentation is Evolving Notion of Defense Diplomacy and its role in achieving foreign policy goals. Professor A.S.M. Ali Ashraf, please.
Honorable Chief Guest and distinguished participants, it's an absolute honor and privilege to be here and talk about defense diplomacy and its relevance to foreign policy. The title of my presentation is Evolving Notion of Defense Diplomacy and its Role in Achieving Foreign Policy Goals. My presentation is divided into 5 broad themes, as you can see. First, I begin with an identification of 2 central questions. Then I talk a little bit about why these questions matter. Being an academic, I would like to confuse you by arguing that defense diplomacy does not have any straightforward meaning. Rather, there are competing higher theoretical perspectives, each having its own way of defining what defense diplomacy is. Then after this theoretical confusion, we'd like to look at the global practices, and I'll confine to 4 major practices, looking at the American, the British, the Australian, and the Chinese practices of defense diplomacy, to understand how the notion of defense diplomacy has evolved in these countries, and then I'll focus on Bangladesh case study. So the 2 questions that are driving my presentation will be how has the notion of defense diplomacy evolved, and what role can defense diplomacy play in achieving the foreign policy goals? Now, the first question that should intrigue us is, why should we care about the topic of defense diplomacy? And I would like to argue that there are at least 3 major reasons. The first reason is that the very term defense diplomacy is quite problematic and a little paradoxical, because the traditional notion of defense is about the use of military force and the war-making capacity of a state. So the conventional argument is that defense is all about fighting war. On the other hand, diplomacy is about making peace through dialogues and conversations. So defense and diplomacy don't go together. That is a very conventional wisdom. The second argument is that during the entire period of the Cold War, from the 1940s to the 1990s, the 2 superpowers divided the world into their own spheres of influence, and defense diplomacy was quite predictable because the Americans had their own way of building military alliances. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, its own way of building its own military alliances, and members of the alliances would practice defense diplomacy in a very predictable manner. But with the end of the Cold War and the transformation of the international security environment, there was a need for reshaping defense diplomacy. And then we were struck by the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and the post 9/11 era provided newer challenges and newer opportunities for defining and practicing defense diplomacy. The third major reason for understanding and studying defense diplomacy is that we are now dealing with complex humanitarian emergencies in a wide range of countries where the demand for peacekeeping missions are requiring newer types of defense diplomacy. So the big question that should concern us is like, how do various theories of IR define defense diplomacy? I mean, the interesting finding is that there are quite contrasting perspectives in the field of IR when it comes to defense diplomacy. But the dominant school of thought is the liberals, because when the Cold War ended, we saw that the Western countries were trying to engage the post-Soviet countries and the Eastern European countries. So the desire to expand NATO, the willingness to introduce security sector reforms in the post-Soviet countries were the ultimate goal of the defense diplomacy. It was in the context where defense diplomacy was defined as a cooperative initiative to promote international security. But there are others, like the Marxists, who would like to argue that defense diplomacy has been the vehicle for the global north to maintain their hegemonic relations with the global southern countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Constructivists, on the other hand, focus on the notion of norms, arguing that defense diplomacy is about dialogues between armies, defense diplomacy is about mutual shared understanding and creating the norms of dialogues rather than the escalation of conflicts and tensions. Finally, I would like to argue that the realist theory of IR strikes back and argues that behind the defense diplomatic initiatives, whether it is goodwill visits, whether it is about defense consultations, arms procurement, defense modernization, these are all about enhancing the national interest and maintaining the balance of power for the great power countries. Now, let us look at all of these four theories and their evolving notions of defense diplomacy. As I said before, that with the end of the Cold War, the traditional notion of deterrence and territorial defense were thought to be quite obsolete. And it was in this context, the 1998 Strategic Defense Review of the United Kingdom advanced this notion of defense diplomacy as one of the 8 different pillars of its strategic worldview. And it argued that defense diplomacy is about cooperative security with Russia and East European countries. That was the quite dominant school of thought in understanding defense diplomacy. Then looking at the Asian countries, the ASEAN +3, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the Shangri-La Dialogue, which are attended by quite senior officials, including defense secretaries of the United States, the Chinese senior military delegates, and defense ministers from major Asian countries. These were kind of creating the impression that we are moving towards building new norms. We should quite be mindful of the fact that primarily the Malaysian and the Singaporean concerns over national security and their concerns over Indonesian hegemonic ambitions in the Southeast Asian countries were the primary driver of building these cooperative dialogues and the defense diplomatic initiatives. So while the liberals focus on the benign and the cooperative gesture of defense diplomacy, the constructivists look at how defense diplomacy is about a constructed idea developed by nations and their defense engagements. Marxists, on the other hand, focus on the behavior of the former imperial powers, the former superpowers, and also the liberal peace-building efforts. And their main argument is that the patron-client relationship between the global north and the global south has not ended, rather it is being persisting because of the evolving nature of the defense diplomacy. And they basically point to the African landscape where long-standing military presence by major European countries are demonstrating the ability of the former imperial powers to maintain their influence. Now, looking at the realist school of thought, they define, as I said before, defense diplomacy as an instrument of national power. And so looking at a bunch of examples that the Australian Defense Force does in the Pacific countries, in the Pacific region, the way Argentina and Brazil have practiced it, or the Eastern European countries. The main goal is to use defense diplomacy as a means to achieve their foreign policy goals, and that is quite a realist understanding. Now, looking at the post 9/11 era, we know that the biggest international case study would be that how the United States built up a coalition, an international military coalition of more than 40 countries to deploy their forces in Afghanistan for the fight against Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And this is quite not very well understood through the defense diplomacy lens, but the formation of the military coalition and the maintenance of the coalition was a Herculean task for the defense diplomats of the United States. The whole purpose was to build and maintain the coalition, to do joint threat assessment, civil military reconstruction, which is also known as provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then moving from counterterrorism to counterinsurgency, and then planning for an exit. These are a whole range of activities defined and practiced under the notion of defense diplomacy. Now, I'll be looking at the selective country cases, and the best way to start is the American case. And this book title clearly illustrates the notion of defense diplomacy. It's titled Boots and Suits. Basically, the boots represents defense and suits represent the diplomats. And the whole argument is that traditional notion of diplomacy is quite narrow and is thought to be the only domain of the foreign policy practitioners. And on the other hand, the traditional notion of defense is also quite narrow because it refers to the practice of the military forces. And the whole idea is that there are now overlapping responsibilities and more interagency responsibilities. And the post-Cold War multiple complex emergencies are requiring the facts that defense and civilian diplomats need to better understand their objectives and coordinate their activities in the pursuit of defense diplomacy. Now, there are three levels of analysis when it comes to understanding American defense diplomacy practices: the strategic, the operational, and the tactical. Looking at the strategic definition, the argument is that it's about the pursuit of diplomatic aims by civilian as well as military personnel in relation to military topics. What are those topics? The topics are related to managing threats or tensions, negotiating peace talks, formation and maintenance of alliances and coalitions, and promoting cooperation such as arms deals. So these are referred to the strategic pursuit of defense diplomacy. Looking at the operational, it's of the practice of government-to-government negotiations by defense officials, such as engagement by defense ministers and their foreign counterparts, deploying of the warships to enhance the navigation of international waters, and conducting training exercises. At the tactical level, we see that there are common aspects of warfare in the 21st century, where the UN peacekeeping missions are one way of looking at this, like how civil, military, humanitarian emergencies are planned both in contexts like Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as in the African peacekeeping missions. Provincial reconstruction teams, and then critical role of the military commanders and embassy officials. Now, the PRTs are often quite puzzling but we should quite understand that after the major combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq were over, the major challenges for the American military forces and their coalition partners were dealing with the insurgencies in both countries, something they were not completely prepared for. So they innovated this notion of province-based reconstruction teams. And these PRTs were quite different. The Americans, their model was more military-led, but they also needed to invite the diplomats and civilian development activists and participants and NGOs. So the whole idea is that there was an intensive need for ambassadors and military commanders on the ground to plan and design and implement development initiatives within the provincial reconstruction team, something quite innovative in the context of the post 9/11. Now, looking at the British practices, we see that the UK is one of the champions in terms of innovating the notion of defense diplomacy, and looking at their willingness to retain access, basing, and overflight rights in African countries. Now, the realists find it quite relevant to understand that apparently it's all about cooperation, but these are all about maintaining the national interests of the countries concerned. And how do they do it? these are the traditional practices. I'm kind of the blueprint for all countries. The deployment of the defense attaches and defense advisors, the use of the conflict advisors, and the UK also has a conflict prevention pool, like a pool of experts who can be deployed, and then also the employment of the short-term and long-term visits by military training officials. Now, Australians have also used the term quite often in their defense white papers, like they are one of the best practitioners in the concept of defense diplomacy. They define defense diplomacy as low-risk practice because it's not about heightening tensions, and it's about sharing the burdens of cooperative security. And their argument is that it's about generating transparency in security relationship between countries. Some of the flagship defense diplomacy initiatives of the Australian Defence Force are their humanitarian joint exercise in the Pacific countries, their Pacific Patrol Boat program in the exclusive economic zone, but from the real is that what the matter is that the Australia-led intervention in East Timor. But then academics would like to assess to what extent these defense diplomacy initiatives have produced the desired outcome. The desired outcome has always been strategic influence in the region. Academics are skeptical, arguing that, well, some of these are overambitious and they have actually produced very minimum strategic objectives rather than maximum strategic objectives. And often it is quite problematic that defense diplomacy discussions are highly biased towards magnifying their desired outcomes, claiming that they produce bigger impacts. And the argument is that actually not, because the role of other variables, other factors are not counted here. Now, moving on to the Chinese practice, we see that China has been gradually catching up with the Western powers when it comes to defense diplomacy practice, and China's increasing presence in the African countries is especially in the context of its defense production supports in selected African countries are quite illustrative of the facts that how these are driven by the pursuit of economic goals and the political and strategic goals. And we should keep in mind that now that the Belt and Road initiatives are a flagship foreign policy project of China, that is well aligned with the Chinese defense diplomacy initiative. Now, moving on to the Bangladesh case, we see that Bangladesh has also been one of the best practitioners in the context of defense diplomacy with our humble resources and ambitions. As the DGBISS has rightly pointed out, the genesis of the defense diplomacy from the post-independence years of Bangabandhu's foreign policy to I'm not going to look at the historical cases, but looking at some of the most recent cases like IPAM's seminar of the senior military officials, and then the joint exercises of the South Asian 4 countries. These are some of the most prominent, I would like to argue that defense diplomacy practices of Bangladesh. Then also looking at the long-standing defense procurement partnerships with China is part of our defense diplomacy as well. We have defense ties with the neighboring countries, including India, then looking at the joint exercises. But something that Bangladesh takes most pride in would be the peacekeeping missions. We have, the most recent data would show that we are in the number 4, and our total troop contributions have hovered between 6,000 to 7,000. And the most compelling missions for us were Congo, Mali, Central African Republic, and Sudan. These are all complex, multidimensional stabilization missions, and some of these are requiring robust posturing, something that we are very much reluctant to. So defense diplomacy is not only about goodwill visits, high-level talks, it's also about creating standards and best practices in terms of international, multilateral, military coalition operations in the context of UN peacekeeping missions. We have also contributed to the joint exercises in Saudi Arabia, keeping in mind that there has been 2 different international military coalitions in the fight against ISIS. One is the US-led coalition, another one is a Saudi-led coalition. The Saudi-led coalition creates the impression that Muslim countries are willing and able to fight against these Islamist militants, and it is a way of doing the burden sharing by countries having predominantly Muslim population. Now, again, we need to be quite pragmatic that defense diplomacy does not always produce the desired outcome, and there are at least 2 factors that can limit the impact of defense diplomacy. One is that if there are substantive political differences between two countries, then whatever investments are made in the name of defense diplomacy, it may not produce the desired outcome. The best example would be, despite years of military and defense engagements between the United States and its counterparts in China and Russia, we still see that the world, they have a very sharply polarized world views, as illustrated in the context of the Ukraine war and tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. So the argument is that the differences over political differences over the issue of China, political differences over the role of NATO in the post-Soviet era, these are the major stumbling blocks, despite the fact that the NATO and Russia had a council. NATO wanted to engage Russia it spent more than 10 years after the Cold War. In the 1990s, it looked very promising. Francis Fukuyama's theory was making us utopian, that we are looking at the end of history and the liberal order is prevailing. Actually not. Looking at the second major source of skepticism is that often defense diplomacy is thought to be a magic bullet. We tried, it will produce desired outcome in the way of building good relationship. No, defense diplomacy has to be understood as long-term investment. And so defense diplomacy practitioners need to be mindful of the fact that there might be short-term crises between countries, even though there are long-standing and years of defense diplomacy interactions. So, which means that defense diplomatic dialogues and initiatives cannot be extricated in the context of short-term crisis. There is a need for the best way of understanding defense diplomacy is that it is about it's a continuous process of building confidence and trust between partner countries and participating countries. Now, the biggest question for us would be, how can we utilize these concepts, these competing theories of defense diplomacy and knowledge of these global best practices in our context? How can we think of integrating defense diplomacy in achieving our foreign policy goals? Before we look at the answer, let us have a look at Bangladesh's international worldview. How do we perceive our strategic environment and economic realities? Because these are the two major factors that define our foreign policy priorities, and that should also develop our requirements for the defense diplomacy. Now, given the fact that we are located in the Bay of Bengal, and where we don't have to be rocket scientists to understand the Indo-Pacific strategy and the Belt and Road Initiative provide two competing pressures for our foreign policy. And so great power interest and the search for sustained economic growth, the challenges for LDC graduation, turbulent neighborhood defining our southern and eastern neighbors, evolving threats. These are the strategic environment and economic realities that are some of the drivers of our foreign policy priorities. So what are the priorities? I identify, we can have a list of 10 different things, but I thought that it will be more parsimonious and more practical to focus on a few priorities. I would like to argue that the 5 major priorities for us, the first thing would be, from a strategic perspective, definitely striking a delicate balance between IPS and BRI. And then second would be maintaining our excellence in UN peace operations. Third would be bolstering our Rohingya repatriation efforts, something quite easy to say but difficult to do. Then diversifying our export baskets. We are over-relying on the RMG exports, and we're also over-banking on the remittances earned from the labor migration. And finally, extending best practices in counterterrorism. Now, if these are the key foreign policy priorities, then the big question would be, how can we tailor our defense diplomacy initiatives to achieve our foreign policy goals? And this is how, one thing we should quite well understand. Defense diplomacy is not aimed at supplanting or replacing existing foreign policy practices. Absolutely not. Defense diplomacy is about adapting, tailoring, and integrating military engagements, military cooperation, military and civil cooperation for the pursuit of foreign policy goals. Nowhere in the world defense diplomacy initiatives have aimed to undermine existing foreign policy practices. Absolutely not. Rather, defense diplomacy is about first understanding the broader foreign policy objectives and then understanding the existing bilateral and multilateral foreign policy practices, and then integrating the role of defense services and role of defense level engagements for the pursuit of the broader foreign policy. Keeping those in mind, those parameters in mind, I would like to argue that now maintaining the delicate balance between IPS and BRI requires us to design our defense deals in a way that reaps benefits from both of our relations with our great powers, United States and China in this context. Joint exercises should also be continued, keeping in mind that there are competing geopolitical interests in the region. So we should not be doing something to give a wrong signal, rather building confidence and trust among great powers and making and reducing ambiguities would be our ultimate goal. Military education, we have some of the best and finest military education institutions, our Defense Staff College and the NDC, and I would like to argue that these would be our venues for practicing defense diplomacy. Peacekeeping excellence, we have one of the world's finest military training facilities for peacekeeping missions, and so we need to continue to upgrade the capacity and the performance of the BIPSOD. The stabilization missions and robust peacekeeping postures are putting increasing pressures. We need to better understand, do a situation analysis, and upgrade our capabilities to meet the needs of the complex emergencies in African countries like Mali. Rohingya repatriation diplomacy. This is something where defense diplomacy is yet to play its big role, and I would like to argue that there's a need for exploring how defense diplomacy can play its rightful role in promoting dialogues with the major Asian powers like India and China, and also engaging Myanmar. Often we have military officials participating in Staff College and NDC from Myanmar. We don't see that quite often continuing. I'm done. Export market diversification, keeping in mind that we have major destinations in terms of peacekeeping missions, so we can align those destinations with looking for market access. And finally, we need to do like joint training and need assessment for enhancing our counterterrorism capacities. Final slide, lessons learned. We live in an anarchic world, and then military forces remain a vital instrument of foreign policy in such an anarchic state system. And there are competing theories and international best practices. Keeping those in mind, the ultimate conclusion is that successful defense diplomacy must require understand the broader foreign policy goals in partner countries and target nations, and there will be a need for more coordinated efforts between the civilian officials and the military officials. With that, I would like to conclude here. Thank you so much.
Thank you indeed, Professor Ali Ashraf, for enlightening us on this particular aspect of defense diplomacy. I'd now request the second presenter. He is ASM Tarek Hassan Shimol, Research Fellow, BIISS, to speak on growing geopolitical competition, challenges and opportunities of defense diplomacy of Bangladesh. Please keep time. It's 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. Respected chief guest of this seminar, Chief of Army Staff, respected Chief of General Staff, respected Chairman BIISS, respected Director General, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. The topic that I will talk about will be growing geopolitical competition, challenges and opportunities for defense diplomacy for Bangladesh. As my previous speaker talked elaborately on the theoretical underpinning of the term defense diplomacy, I will try to argue and open my presentation with two basic arguments. I will try to look at the defense diplomacy, the term from a practitioner's approach, that's first. And I will argue that this term has a geopolitical connotation. I mean, the evolution of this term from all along. As we have heard from the aftermath of the Second World War, we see that in the Cold War period, both Warsaw Pact and NATO tried to get the countries within their fold, right? And they tried defense diplomacy within the members of these two security alliance, as well as they tried to get the newly independent countries which got their independence from the colonialism. And some of them actually joined those camps and some of them tried to be a free agent. And these two countries, Soviet Union and the US, tried to enhance the capability of these armies, both in their alliance and both the countries which are closer to their national objective. That's the Cold War period. In the post-Cold War period, fast forward, we see that NATO tried to kind of instill a democratic transition in the post-Warsaw countries, that's the Eastern Europe, because they had a fear that these large-scale Soviet armies, if they don't have a smooth democratic transition, they might actually disrupt the whole geopolitical situation in the Balkan region and Eastern European region. And they tried different sorts of programs, for example, educational exchanges, officer exchanges, all those programs are part of defense diplomacy. And in the 1990s, it was previously in the Cold War period, this term was largely attributed towards security assistance. But in the 1990s, the Ministry of Defense from the British Ministry of Defense, they tried to give it an umbrella term by calling it defense diplomacy. And then under this term, there are many factors that can be actually grouped. For example, there is a seminal work by Andrew Coty and Anthony Foster. They tried to give a kind of 10 different things, list 10 different things under the same, term, umbrella term of defense diplomacy. It talks about bilateral and multilateral contacts between senior military and civilian defense officials, appointing defense attaches, bilateral defense cooperation agreement, training of foreign military and civilian defense personnel, provision of expertise and advice on democratic control and of armed forces, defense management, military technical areas, contacts and exchanges between military personnel and units, placement of military or civilian personnel in partner countries, deployment of training teams, provision of military equipment and other material aid, bilateral and multilateral military exercises for training purposes. Now, fast forwarding to the Afghanistan war, as my previous speaker talked about it, that NATO countries, unlike the Cold War period where they had a kind of symbolic idea that the whole NATO will, fight as a single unit, that has to be implemented during the Afghan war. And it was through defense diplomacy, the US tried, and other diplomatic tools, US tried to manage the NATO countries so they can actually come together in Afghanistan and work like a single unit of force. So that was the one evolution of defense diplomacy that we have seen. And then at the same time, we see that there was, the war on terror that was going on at the global scale. And during that time, US and its Western allies understood the importance of local allies where the war on terror was waging. And they tried to kind of develop capacity building programs in those states and within those defense elements. And during that time, we have see a trend that counterterrorism training, joint military exercises for counterterrorism were going on. That was a trend during that time. The second thing that I want to argue that in most of the literature, if you see that defense diplomacy will be understood as a peacetime activity for non-violent way to kind of keep peace and resolve tension and all that. And as we have seen that 4 schools approaches to defense diplomacy, I will argue this is not only a peacetime activity. I would argue it's a wartime activity as well. And countries, if you look at the Indo-Pacific region right now, many of the countries are preparing for a conflict that might be up ahead of us. And they are trying different kind of exercises, among themselves. I will come to that later. So when we're talking about a peacetime activity, the right example will be, one of the right example will be ASEAN Defense Minister meeting, ADMM, through which ASEAN countries try to have a conversation between their armies, among their armies, and try to resolve some of the issues that they might have. And one of the wartime example will be the recent Russia-Ukraine war, where we saw that Iran provided, cruise missile and drones to Russia. On the other hand, Turkey provided drones to Ukraine. So that's a classic example how through defense diplomacy during a wartime, both Russia and Ukraine tried to kind of manage and try to kind of secure the strategic weapons they need for the war. And the whole Western effort to support Ukraine is part of a bigger, defense diplomacy platform. So it will be, naive to think that defense diplomacy is only a peacetime effort and only to maintain, peace and, non-violence. That can be said. I mean, I will come to that later on. Now, moving on to with that geopolitical connection in mind, if we look at around our world in the Indo-Pacific region, what we are seeing? We're seeing that there is competing vision of norms, rules, and order. On the one side, we understood that there is Indo-Pacific strategy by US and its allies. And on the other hand, we see China with its own kind of understanding of the world, how they want to actually integrate with Belt and Road Initiative and all that. And in the midst of that, we also see that the liberal order that was actually established in the post-World War situation, that is kind of decaying. And the multilateralism that was established by the US and its allies, that kind of getting undermined. Why? Because we see that there are many multilateral problems around Indo-Pacific region, ranging from security to climate change through non-traditional security and all that. And we see also the emergence of minilaterals. So we are bringing in minilateral groupings which are trying to resolve the problems that multilateralism has failed. One of the main reasons that AUKUS and Quad was kind of emerged as try to deal with security problems that US-China competition brings in the Indo-Pacific was the reason that ASEAN actually kind of failed to provide the security that was needed in the Southeast Asian countries. So ASEAN countries alone were not enough to provide security considering their maritime dispute with China. So US came in with their, partner countries and tried to kind of build some minilaterals which might actually address the problem that might not be resolved in a multilateral forum. So that's another trend we are now observing. And with that, we also have to keep in mind that there are some maritime choke points. I will come to that in a bit with some maps. And there are some flashpoints of conflicts around the Indo-Pacific region and Bangladesh. So, and there is also base building activities around us. So if we look at the key choke points in the Indian Ocean region, we can see, you can see the sea line trade that happens through the Indian Ocean region. This is one of the busiest sea lane in the world. 80% of oil-borne trade of for oil and energy happens through this region. So if you can see the choke points, we only we have already experienced that one of our ships got hijacked by the Somali pirates and what might happen. And you can see that Red Sea zone is a zone now for that the commercial ships are trying to avoid. So any kind of conflict in these choke points that will hamper the global sea lane of communication around Indian Ocean region, that will disrupt the business, that will disrupt the freedom of navigation around this region, and that will be very much detrimental for not only for the lateral countries but for the whole global economy. So that's one of the conditions that we are living in. Now moving towards the bases that we have in this region. This is the map of Indo-PACOM Command and their military permanent installation and periodic or rotational installations that we have in the Indo-Pacific region. In the second map, we can see some military bases as well as some ports that can have a military use during a wartime from the countries of China, India, and the US. And now look at the British, French, and American military presence in around this region. So we can see that there is increase of base building activity and kind of intensification of competition around the Indo-Pacific region, where countries are trying to actually get their hands on the land-based ports or sea-based ports, and also trying to build infrastructure projects that might have dual use in the future. Now, with that development in mind, we are seeing increasing militarization around our zone. If you look at the Global Firepower Index of this year, we can see that among top 11 countries, 5 are from Asian region, 5 from Europe, and the ranked 1 is the US. So you can see, with Southeast Asia and South Asian region has the highest boots on the ground in the world in terms of, troops. And we can also see that the defense spending is, growing up. And that actually creates two sorts of problems for developing countries like us. Number one, we can see there is a kind of technology transfer of missiles and enhanced weapon system that get funneled to this region. That's number one. Number two is these developing countries which has a development first approach. They now needs to modernize themselves as well. And if you keep, eye on Asian progress in economic development, at some point that bound to happen, because when countries get richer and richer, and their contribution of their GDP towards defense will go naturally higher. That's the trend that we can actually look, if we look at the history, that is understandable. Another trend is, if you look at the joint forces military exercise, they have sort of understanding and issues that has changed over the years. I will go back to that later part of my presentation. And also there's a substitution of international organizations foundation from a humanitarian and economic setup to a defense cooperation. Much more that is happening in the Indo-Pacific region than any other place. So coming back to Bangladesh context, as my previous speaker tried to argue that, Bangladesh foreign policy, it comes from our constitution, and also there is a second important document, policy document, that is the Indo-Pacific Outlook. In both of the documents, if you have a look, it talks about multilateralism, it keeps faith on international institutions, and it also talks about maintaining a balanced and neutral foreign policy. And we don't want we want friendship to all and malice towards none. That's the famous verdict by the Bangabandhu. And if we look at our forces goal 2030, we talk about, it talks about the defense modernization that should actually come. And we also have a trend that there is a diversified weapon system and transfer of technologies that can be, if you look at the purchase, that can be understood, that is happening. And also to augment indigenous industry, defense industry for Bangladesh. Now, if we look at this table was provided, received from the Armed Forces Division. You can see from the independence, Bangladesh total signed defense-related MOUs with these countries, the number will be 19. And the pending MOUs with these countries is 27. So if you look at the pending, that's 27 defense MOUs that are, going on, discussions are going on. And that gives us an idea that the global powers and the regional powers, major powers, they want to have some sort of defense cooperation with Bangladesh. That's number one. If we look at the type of defense kind of dialogue, military or security dialogue in last 10 years, that's a very interesting, stat to look at. For example, let me actually explain the defense, military, and security dialogue first, and then we'll move on to the multilateral training exercises. If we look at with India, Bangladesh started to have defense dialogue since 2018. Look at the years. It's very recent. It's not actually beyond, very few will be beyond 2015. And Bangladesh, with Turkey, Bangladesh started its third military dialogue 2023. It started actually will be 2015. That's a mistake. And in the UK, with UK, Bangladesh has their first military defense dialogue in 2022. Now look at the multilateral exercises. All these exercises you will see, the prominent exercises is started since the 2010. And around that time, most of them, and it's kind of build. And now Bangladesh have many exercises with these states and with US as well. If we look at the major tag words that came out of all these defense dialogues and the multilateral exercises, we'll see interoperability, maritime domain awareness, capacity building in HADR, counterterrorism, peacekeeping, technological enhancement, maritime security. So these are the major phrases that was covered in these dialogues and multilateral exercises or bilateral exercises. Now, going to the major defense purchases from 2018 to 23, you can see the countries and you can see the weapon system that Bangladesh purchased during this time. One major trend will be a kind of diversification of market. Bangladesh tried to actually get things that will be needed for Bangladesh's defense enhancement in last 5 years. And as well as this also talks about kind of bringing a balance between where Bangladesh is, purchasing these items from. And these will actually enhance Bangladesh's defense capability. And many of these defense articles are pertinent for Bangladesh's UN peacekeeping mission. And, recently we have seen in the event of Kukichin, Bangladesh used drones, during that operation, the combing operation that is going on in the CHT area right now. So what are Bangladesh's concerns? Bangladesh has managed to actually develop interest among the major regional and global partners, so that these partners coming towards Bangladesh to have a kind of defense and cooperation with them, and Bangladesh is trying to augment its own indigenous industry, defense industry as well. But Bangladesh has some concerns. Number one will be how to strike a balance between all these major powers. That will be not only for Bangladesh, that will be other littoral small countries and middle countries as well, middle powers as well. The second will be how much strategic autonomy can we actually receive or, we get out of this kind of polarized world order that we have to see. And there is always a possibility of regional conflict given the flashpoint and militarization that is ongoing in the Indo-Pacific region. And finally, and not the least, that securing our maritime space, because we have our oil reserve and gas reserves in the sea, and we want to, harness the blue economy. And it will be very important to secure not only our shipping lane as well as our maritime space. So I'm overshooting time. I'll stop here. Thank you so much for your patience listening.
Thank you, Shimul, for your presentation, and thank you for bringing Bangladesh's Indo-Pacific outlook and Forces Goal 2030 in the perspective. Now we will be listening to the third presenter, Major General Retired Moinullah Chowdhury, SUP, OSP, WCPSC, former DFC, UNMISS, and AFC Ministro. You will be speaking on defense diplomacy in United Nations and other overseas missions. Horizon to explore.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Respected Chief of Army Staff, Chief of General Staff, esteemed panelists, esteemed audience, revered speakers, ladies and gentlemen, brothers from home and abroad, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. I'm particularly aware of the time, that my time is already over. And however, I will try to remain restricted within the time that allotted to me. However, it's my indulgence and privilege to stand before you here and share the dais with my seniors who had grown me up in Bangladesh Army and brought me up to the stage that I am in. Although the founding thoughts on the primary topic are already well articulated and elucidated by the previous speakers, but I shall just have a glance on the defense diplomacy itself, on my own thoughts, and the UN edifice a little before I embark onto my particular submission of the leveraging UN platform for the defense diplomacy. Unlike the general belief that conducting the diplomacy is mainly the task of the professional diplomats and the ministry concerned, diplomacy in the changed world system is no longer confined to the domains of the career diplomats and one single ministry only. The military power constitutes an integral component of the national power and plays a significant role in implementing state policy. It generates various capacities for the foreign policy, making it an essential element of the diplomacy in wider context. Hence, the defense diplomacy has been and is always a branch of the broader diplomacy that aims to use the armed forces in a coherent way, in a non-coercive manner, to achieve the foreign policy goals through a set of tools such as already highlighted by many of our speakers, the high-level military official visits, joint military exercises, security, and the defense dialogues, participating in peacekeeping missions, and providing the assistance to other countries such as humanitarian aid, relief during the crisis time, and the disaster management. United Nations missions and peacekeeping missions, the Bangladesh has long been playing its significant role in maintaining the peace and tranquility and stability in the conflicting states in and around the globe. Bangladesh military's footprint have widely been seen from East Timor up to the Haiti. So almost all the continents were touched by the military personnel in those under the aegis of the United Nations. Since the area of diplomacy is systematically expanding, and apart from strictly political issues, the contemporary diplomacy focused on the problems of trade, economic, scientific, or military contexts. Therefore, an enhanced understanding and appropriate comprehension has become essential to realize the foreign policy objectives of any country. It is thus proved to be a specialized instrument of the foreign policy and need to occupy an enduring place in the system of cooperation between the states and international organizations, either bilaterally or multilaterally. Ladies and gentlemen, the military officers in our country or everywhere in the country are always trained in achieving their respective tactical proficiency and operational goals. But they all are groomed with the strategic outlook progressively as they grow up the ladder. Just to give you an example, once somebody is a major or a lieutenant colonel in Bangladesh Armed Forces or equivalent in the Army, Navy, and the Air Forces, their status remains same wherever they go, elsewhere in every country. What an advantage it is that his status and his rank remain universal, and he gets the equal status everywhere, and then can talk to his or her counterparts whenever they need to. This is a great advantage to take the leverage of the positions and the ranks. And the military, as it is always said, that they talk similar. Their language are similar, they talk, their gesture, their posture, and their transparencies are similar. So they can understand each other easy and better. Once utilized appropriately, they can bring an effective result for the country in achieving either the defense diplomacy goal or the foreign policy goal. Having said that, let's now look towards now what we can leverage from the United Nations platform. Ladies and gentlemen, Bangladesh is born half a century ago, the country which was first known to the world for our sawmen, but intense 9 months bloody spattered war of liberation 1971, and for our language and for the brave soldiers and the people, some of them are sitting in the hall today. Then it was by our father of the nations with his individual charisma beside rebuilding the war-ravaged country, touched almost all the required places and spaces of the globe to introduce the nation state to the world. Some of them, like OIC, the non-aligned country, the United Nations were not, and then introduced the country to that. He endorsed Bangladesh's commitment towards the global peace and extended our friendship to our global partners. Bangladesh flag were further taken to the different part of the world when it undertook the journey under the flag of the United Nations in 1988, the year in which the Bangladesh first stepped into the United Nations effort. Rest 36 plus years till today with the United Nations peacekeeping operation is nothing but our success story. Bangladesh consistently remained the #1 troop contributing country in the United Nations till date. Ladies and gentlemen, when I talk about the defense diplomacy, I would like to bring this also into the perspective. When I was interviewed first to be the Deputy Force Commander in the United Nations back in 2020, I was asked that what is happening in the Rohingya camp? What is happening in that part of the area where I am commanding as the general officer commanding? And I asked that why you're asking me this question. They said that this is the success story of Bangladesh. Because of the military, the people there are safe, secure, and well harbored. What happened? What did this military do there? Because in the initial 3 months, the relief were distributed. Can any of us imagine that 700,000 people came by 1 or 2 nights there? Where do they get the ablution unit? Where do they get the shower? Where do they get the places? Where the food? The military, on the call of the government, have stepped in and then supported them so very well. So this is the way that defense can replay a good role in taking the name of the country into the different part of the world. The United Nations, as we always say, that it is for the safer world since established in 1948. I would like to quote the Dag Hammarskjöld, who said that the famous one, the peacekeeping is not the job for soldiers, but only soldiers can do it. And I would like to establish that in the subsequent slides. You can see that, I don't know, cannot be seen there. The first one is the total UN member states are 193. And the peace missions since 1948 are 71. And the current peacekeeping operations are only 11, less Mali, although the transition period is going on there. And the contributing the uniform personnels are by 121. Here I would like to inform you that all the people get the opportunity to mingle together, talk together, work together, and understand each other much better, taking the United Nations platform. The 2 missions that I commanded, in one, there were 71 countries, people involved, and in another country, in Western Sahara, we had 57 countries. And just know that they all were commanded by Bangladesh. And then they know about Bangladesh. They know about my country. We know about their country. And this is the way that we can harmonize ourselves into the international platform. Just let's know about how a mission looks like. The mission is commanded by the special representative of the Secretary General. And then the way you can say that, what is the construct of the mission, where the civilian counterparts are also there, the militaries are also there, including the police personnel. It's commanded by the force commander of the level of the Assistant Secretary General, above D2. And then you can see there are a lot of AFP, means agencies, funds, and programs, and all the work together. And we can really influence any activities and mingle together to bring results on our behalf. Now, I would like to say about the Bangladesh success story. Bangladesh first embarked in 1988 under the United Nations missions, as I already told you. But the next story was the Gulf War 1991, where I was also one of the participants as a young lieutenant. And then in the coalition forces, we know the fallout of that particular year. After the war, Bangladesh was asked to give the palace guard in KSA, but however, did not take place. But the following year, Bangladesh have sent the troops to the Operation Kuwait Punarghaton, STMK, and many other, and still they are there since 1992. And the other United Nations missions, right immediately after the Gulf War, Bangladesh were called upon because of the dedication, commitment, and the service that Bangladesh Armed Forces rendered. Now, what all the activities that we do? The Bangladesh, the military, they work for the social upliftment into that particular area. They are so well accepted by the local people. I can cite the example about the Sierra Leone, where I was also there. I can cite the example about the Liberia. I can cite the example about the South Sudan, definitely. And then I can cite the example about the Western Sahara as well. And just very recently, what I can talk to you about the South Sudan is that because of the presence and the pursuance of the people in the South Sudan and Bangladesh leadership, Bangladesh could embark or send almost a battalion stand to the UNISFA. This is the glaring example of the defense diplomacy and the success of Bangladesh. And I can tell you only this much, that the The president of the country has called Bangladeshi officers and told them that if you want to open a consulate, if you want to open an embassy there, go anywhere in the capital city and find out the area we will give you. It's just because it was possible because of the soldiers from Bangladesh who all are working there. Absolutely accepted by any one of you. You know about the South Sudan, which got independent in 2011, and where all the troops from Bangladesh were sent back. But one engineer company was there and still there, the oldest company there. And the president told me in the capacity of the force commander that I am not going to leave this engineer company anymore. They will become South Sudanese in this particular area. So see the impact of them into that. And we can leverage from the bilaterally to that. Right now, that one of the sector commander is there in Juba and trying to open up the business with them and getting all out support from that country. Essentially, I bring out this slide where Mr. Anthony Guterres said that a peacekeeping operation is not an army or a counter-terrorist force or a humanitarian agency. It is a tool to create the space for the nationally owned political solution. Many argues that maybe, as our first speaker said, that the diplomacy is not all in all. I do agree, but we have to also agree to the quote of the Mr. Clausewitz who said that the military action is the extension of the political will. And we have to understand that diplomacy is definitely not an independent, defense diplomacy is definitely not the independent action, but definitely it is a substantive, the force driving the foreign policy of the country. I will not touch this much details as I'm running short of time, but I would just like to say that United Nations peace support operations are doing what? Because they are a specific mandate into the missions. And these days, probably these are the things which I'm not going to read that are done by the peace support operations, which are quite complex and definitely which suits to advance the foreign policy of the country as well. The triple nexus, the new idea that has come, we call it to be PhD, is to call in the UN environment, the peace and security, humanitarian aid and development cooperation. This is the way that now you are going to run the United Nations, the mission, which is quite difficult. But however, if you do not involve yourself into the development activities and support the humanitarian agencies into in the country that you are deployed to, probably the mandate implementation will be quite difficult. Now see the contemporary challenges of the peace support operations, because the world is becoming quite complex. And then where everything has come into that, started from the climate to the global peace security, the domestic issues, the non-actor, the terrorism, the warlords, and the national securities are in questions. So all the developing inclusive society is also coming to the places. So United Nations now missions are quite multi-challenging and multi-dimensional in nature. The dynamic world environment is also coming into the play. And you can see that all the wars are happening all around. The 2020 has changed the worldview after the COVID, the recession followed to that, and the rise of the new superpowers and the multipolar world is creating problem for the United Nations thing. So anybody who is involving himself into the United Nations missions has to have appropriate knowledge on this and then definitely go in the deployment. And not to say about this, the Middle East crisis factory has already, we started observing it. Now, how do the United Nations they deal with these situations? They have set certain priorities. This is just for you certain idea. They call it to be the A4P, means action for peacekeeping, where there are certain priorities and the priorities are interchangeable. And then with that, probably probably United Nations missions will be able to cope with the challenges. The last but one slide that I have, that UN military components operating in the diplo-military role. They are not purely in the military role nowadays. And all these things which are written there, including the military component, the force protection role, the military component, the active fighting role, The military component is also in the negotiating role with the government, and the military components are also in supporting the humanitarian aids and agencies. If I cite the example of the South Sudan and UNMISS, as I already said, that every single movement, civilian or military or humanitarian agencies are covered by the military. They need to be protected well to go one place to another. Now, way to go faster. I would just like to humbly request that these are not recommendations, but these are the evolution by which we think that we can really discuss about the defense diplomacy in support of the foreign policy. We need to have the situational awareness and very proactive role. I do agree with our previous speakers that this is not a one-day affair. It is a long-term investment that we need to do. We need to set our priority, and we need to have a greater coordination between the agencies and the organizations that we have, which are really taking the foreign policy forward. We must have the strategic mindset in doing that, and our national security interests to be well highlighted, periodically reviewed, and then exposed to the people who all are going to implement that. The integrated situational awareness, its plan and conduct are the forefront right at the moment. The meaningful engagement with the countries where our military footprints are available need to be engaged. I would like to humbly request to the respected Chief of Army Staff here. We know that in the many armies, we have the foreign area officers, we have the foreign liaison corps and many other things. If we can develop something of that nature, probably that we'll be able to have better deployment of the defense diplomacy in the different part of the area. We can join the agencies, funds and programs, which are huge advantage to us, and probably they'll be able to assist the people. I would also like to declare here one thing and congratulate the respected Chief of Army Staff who has already allowed the officers of Bangladesh Army to go in Lian to the United Nations and then support in their capacity the defense diplomacy there. Thank you very much, sir. And UN career focus to be there. Just to cite an example, the gentleman who was the military observers in one mission came back as a contingent commander, as a lieutenant colonel and a colonel, came back again as a brigadier general to the sector commander, and came back again as a major general, the deputy force commander, and now competing for force commander in the same mission. So we have to have certain pre-preparations to prepare our the officers and ranks and files to go into the United Nations. Training and establishing faculty in maybe in the Bangladesh University of the Professional or any educational institute that Army or Navy and the Air Force finds better to advance our defense diplomacy forward. With that, I would just like to highlight these things. Nothing is linear in this complex world. We have political, military, economic, social, and information infrastructures, all these issues, and probably these are getting spiral and becoming complex. We have to understand the things proper, and then we have to develop our own strategy in this VUCA world, which is quite volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I would like to end by telling that 2 + 2 = 4. It is a mathematical calculation. But if you ask somebody in the present world, they will tell you 2 + 2. I'll let you know later. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Major General Chaudhary, for highlighting defense diplomacy impact in the UN context. Now we are going to have a break of 10 minutes, and now it is 11:22, 11:32. We are back here to listen to the fourth presenter. So 10 minutes break.
diplomats. When diplomacy fails, war begins. Now, let me tell you a story. When I was a student at the staff college, my directing staff would always harness upon me to fight a battle and to win that battle. So anytime when I lost that battle, he would rebuke or reprimand me to any extent. So when I went to the National Defense College as a student, my senior directing staff would say that you will not fight a battle, you will bring peace. So whenever a battle or a war resulted in a prolongation or rather prevention of war, I always got a rebuke, a reprimand from them. So in staff college, I learned how to fight a war. In National Defense College, I learned how to make peace. So that was the transformation in the personality of a soldier from the rank of a major lieutenant colonel to that of a brigadier general major general when it becomes a divisional commander or later on a corps commander or say army chief. Army chiefs always look for peace. They really do take into account they will fight a war. But fighting a war is always implicit in their psyche. So we also have the figures of the other political philosophers or strategists, and all of them, in fact, have highlighted not only the importance of peace, but also the exigency of war. So we find that diplomacy is an essential component of national power. Now, there are 4 elements of power: diplomacy, information, military, and economics. I mean, you see the first one is diplomacy. And that's why diplomacy embraces all the other 3 elements of power. But it is also important in order to understand diplomacy, you also have to understand your national interest and the strategic environment in which you are operating, for which you must always assess your own weakness and the other's strength. So for a military commander, in order to become a diplomat, what is needed is the intellectual depth and your practitioner's insight. So you're combining both theory and practice. Without a blend of this, it would be difficult for you to operate as a diplomat wearing a uniform. We have very good examples in the world of such military diplomats. One of the finest was probably Douglas MacArthur. He was the one in Japan, which is said, formulated the Constitution. And that Japan will not fight a war, it will have a force which will be primarily defensive in nature, was under his persuasion included in the Japanese Constitution. So we can see that military generals can offer the services of diplomats. But again, so the arbitrary advocacy of peace and rejection of war is too naive a theory. I personally think that now, if the problem of the state was only building a peace, then the solution to it was not at all difficult. But the point is that if you surrender yourself to an aggressor state, peace will always be there. Now, the real task or challenge of a military commander as diplomat is how to struggle for peace that protects and ensures your national interest and the pursuit of your national security. Because we live in an anarchical society, the environment in which there is no supranational authority. So the most important for you to survive in this kind of situation is to understand the value of self-help. So the power of the military forms the essence of diplomacy of a state in its relationship with the external world. Now, the sources of diplomacy are rooted in realism or realpolitik. This was recognized by no lesser than your Henry Kissinger. But he also said that, but its outcome lies in the hope for idealism or liberalism. So both become part and parcel of the theoretical models of idealism or realism and realism. Now, I will give you a few concrete examples. I've considered Singapore model to be a very unique one in trying to protect its national interests through the advocacy of diplomacy. Because its foreign policy or defense policy is built upon 2 pillars. One is diplomacy, the other one is deterrence. Now, deterrence means that the threats which are emerging from outside, you should be able to handle them effectively, both in the localized context, also in the context of regional resilience. Now, they have a very strong military force. And this is also one of the reasons that they have a strong strategic posture. And this posture embeds certain aspects of their application, strategic coercion that they have done with Malaysia a number of times, and the rest peacekeeping, humanitarian relief operations, and humanitarian intervention. These are part of soft power diplomacy. Now, James World's Air Forces, they say that Singapore Air Force is the most powerful and capable air arm in Southeast Asia, and nobody will deny this. Now, Singapore holds its air show once in every 2 years. And in this air show, they invite almost about 100,000 people. Just imagine, for a small country like Singapore, promoting its air power through the exhibition of air show. And they have got one of the finest aerobatic teams. Now, in that particular air show, the attendees are military commanders, your diplomats, and even businessmen. So the way they are taking this air show to the forefront of embracing the other countries, not only to be inspired by their aerobatic display, but also to get into contracts in which Singapore is one of the vital components. Now, defense diplomacy is also an application of non-violent and non-coercive strategies. Now, the story of Chittagong Hill Tracks. I operated in Chittagong Hill Tracks for about 6 or 7 years with Bangladesh Army and other paramilitary forces. I always say that this chapter of our defense diplomacy, I always consider it so, is underrated. Just you imagine the way Army and other paramilitary forces were able to hold their ground in protecting the national interest and in protecting our strategic security interests by not guaranteeing our nationhood is an example which is worth imitating by other countries. But I do not find in our security literature much talk about this contribution of the Army to Chittagong Hill Tracts preservation. Rather, there are, in fact, essays or articles which have contributed to our understanding of non-traditional security threats as the main component of our strategic issue, which I think is wrong. And about peacekeeping operations, my previous speaker has highlighted extensively. I'll not go into it, but one thing I think needs mention. Just imagine Sierra Leone adopts Bengali as the official language. It is only because of the peacekeepers, the contribution they made to keeping security in that particular country. And they have adopted it since 2002. That means this is a pride of the nation, which military has been able to embolden into the cultural aspect. So this is what I call defense officers involved in promoting diplomacy in other countries of the world. Now, the air power is also used for diplomatic purposes. Now, Red Arrows, that is the aerobatic team of Royal Air Force, they act as diplomats. They travel from country to country. Not only they display their aerobatic skills, but behind those aerobatic skills, they also become an inspiration for the other air forces to emulate them. The way our peacekeeping forces have sold their both hardwares and softwares to the rest of the world in emulating the best practices of Bangladesh's peacekeepers. Then gunboat diplomacy is something which is in vogue for quite a long time. And I must say that Bangladesh Navy's involvement by deploying ships in Lebanon is a heroic and very encouraging initiative. Now, after that, I will talk a bit about the future directions for defense diplomacy, and I will be very specific. Now, geostrategic location is very unique. Many of my previous speakers have said that it is the confluence of South Asia and Southeast Asia and crowns the Bay of Bengal in Indian Ocean region. From that point of view, we need a strong military force, particularly a strong navy. Without a strong navy, probably somewhat the sea lanes of communication of Bangladesh will be vulnerable. And when your sea lanes of communication are vulnerable, your shore will also become vulnerable. We did a number of this amphibious exercises in our staff college, National Defense College. There we found out the truth of it. And naturally, being an Air Force officer, when you say that you want both your Army and the Navy to be strong enough to deal with the enemy, then you also have the Air Force to be equally equipped with the wherewithals by which it will, three forces will be able to have a very strong deterrent posture. Now, this is, I'm telling from my practical experience. I served for about 4 years in Brunei as High Commissioner, and I had the experience of dealing with our migrant workers. Their state is extremely sordid from point of view of a coordination aspect because of the lack of information. I personally feel that it is the defense intelligence units and other security intelligence units which will be able to provide necessary information and intelligence to the missions so that the migration process ultimately becomes a stable, safe, and secure, in fact, a commitment on the part of the government. And I think the DAs, they can provide a lot of help in this regard by working closely with the National Security Intelligence and also Director General Forces Intelligence. The next one, we have got troubled relations with Myanmar, and so Rohingyas have already become a security issue. So for that, we all understand that we must have a very strong deterrent posture that can only come through by having our strong military, particularly the Bangladesh Army and other border security forces. But there is a need on the part of these military commanders to have frequent exchange and communication with the Myanmar government. We must recognize that Myanmar is not what you call administered by political diplomats. Okay, they are in fact administered by military generals, and they only understand the language of the military. So the language of the military is always hard, and in this case, that one is needed because your defense diplomacy does not talk only about your soft power capabilities, but it also takes into cognizance the hard power material capabilities of a state. If you have to deal with Myanmar, I personally think that we should deal with them with iron in hand. Now, future direction, military diplomats and heads of the missions, okay, they should have very close cooperation with them and understanding, which probably in some cases is missing. This is my personal opinion. And there can be, if I've raised a concern as an ambassador, I think there should be a need for looking into it. And does Bangladesh need an IPS, Indo-Pacific strategy? I think it is for the policymakers or I'm a strategy commander to decide about. But what I personally think that particularly when we are talking about Indo-Pacific, so we have embassies in Southeast Asia, right? And all these embassies must have either defense wing or some kind of, in fact, connectivity with the defense wing, which is centered at a bigger, in fact, mission. Now, what do the high commissioners and ambassadors need? They need the threat analysis of the area, militarization of Indo-Pacific space, alliance shifting, and these information best can be provided by the DA, defense advisor or military attaché, whoever it is. So that's why I've always said the defense wing is a must. When Indo-Pacific strategy is becoming so important for particularly Western countries, I asked one of the French journalists Sir, why do I have this Charles de Gaulle, the aircraft carrier, placed in the Indian Ocean? His reply was that Charles de Gaulle is not an aircraft carrier, it is a 60,000-ton diplomat. And because of the continuous changing perspectives of the Indo-Pacific, there should be more participatory role in strategic and defense dialogues between the Foreign Office and the Defense Department. So what is most important that when we are preparing our diplomats, particularly the military attaches for serving in the foreign missions, they need to have a good grounding in artificial intelligence, cybernetics, and other areas of knowledge which relate to higher sciences of warfare. Now, these are some of the recommendations that I have put forward. And the most difficult task I personally feel is that how to appropriate the goods of defense diplomacy for use by the Foreign Office. We must remember that the world is changing. One of my speakers, in fact, he considered 9/11 to be the fin sickle of the last century, but I considered it was 1989, which was the sickle of the 20th century. The era of Cold War between the East and the West had come to an end. The bipolar world order, which was defined by the United States on one hand and the Soviet Union on the other hand, was no more. There was only one single power with all the wherewithals of, in fact, material capabilities. And in that particular environment, United States of America was able to shape the geopolitics of the world. But then gradually things change. China started rising and China started competing the United States, particularly in global economy, in geostrategically, as well in the Asia Pacific. The annexation of Crimea, Moldova, and recently some parts of Ukraine has shadowed the military strength of the United States of America. Even Europe feels that its security is under threat, so it needs an expansion of NATO. And under the circumstances, in fact, there is not one single superpower, because we have seen since 2003, there has been a gradual decline in the strategic power application of the United States of America. The world is multipolar now. Now, this multipolar world order also has implications for South Asia. And we also know that in South Asia, it is India which is central to the geopolitics, but China is also trying to make an outlet through South Asia to have a dominance as Asia Pacific. So we are under the push and pull of these two great powers. So under this transformative global and international environment, there's a need for rethinking of our security challenges. And it is there where the defense diplomacy comes into account very strategically and very eminently in the national interest. And I would like to thank BISS for organizing this occasion, which has been graced no lesser than the Chief of the Army Staff and General Harun sir and General Amin sir and Shamsher Mubin Chaudhry. All of them are in fact sitting here with us, and they understand much more than probably I do the importance of defense diplomacy. But I'm highlighting the points which are necessary because I feel that there is a need for greater coordination between the Defense Department in Bangladesh and the Foreign Office. And finally, if we look at the instruments in foreign policy, we see that military power is an essential element. So the success of a state's diplomacy lies in fusing the moral precepts of the foreign policy with the material capabilities of the military doctrine in guiding the direction of its international relations. Thank you very much. I think I have taken exactly about 15 minutes, not exceeded. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Excellency, for enlightening us on defense diplomacy in its with its examples, and also you highlighted on the directions that the global situation is taking us or will be taking us. Now we have come to the segment of open discussion, and I would before giving the floor, we have got some requests, and before giving the floor, I'd like to request those who would be intervening to introduce themselves, yourselves, and then please kindly be very precise in your comments and questions. So first, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Shamsher Mobin Chowdhury, Bir Bikram, former Foreign Secretary. The floor, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I think today's event, which comes closely for me on the steps of a lecture I took very recently, the NDC, on the same subject. Except that this NDC was perhaps more specific about the issue. They talked of military diplomacy and not defense diplomacy, because military diplomacy has a much broader connotation. I just focus on two things, which I also did in my NDC, that for Bangladesh, military diplomacy worked best in two cases, and now it's now broadening. One is the bilateral one that we had with Sri Lanka, when Sri Lanka was faced with this internal serious problem, and the Bangladesh military ran special courses at the SIANT in Sylhet for captains and majors of the Sri Lankan army in very large numbers. And that established a huge amount of goodwill for Bangladesh military and for Bangladesh as a whole in Sri Lanka, which continues today. Because now I understand Sri Lankan military office coming to starting from BMA all the way to Staff College and to NDA. My second point would be that we have achieved huge fame and name through the UN peacekeeping missions. And having been in the UN ICCSC for 8 years, I had the privilege of visiting missions in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire. And although those are for non-combatant peacekeepers, but you cannot visit these countries without being talked about the success of Bangladesh peacekeeping missions in those countries. My suggestion here is, because not much was talked about the Bangladesh strategy for military diplomacy. More time was given to the history. And we all know about the history, but I think the focus should have been on what the Bangladesh strategy should be. One could be that after the success of our peacekeeping missions, where we earned enormous goodwill in all these African countries, why not go into a bilateral relationship with these countries, set up military liaison officers, help them the capacity building. We bring some officers here to our NDC Staff College, but why not set up military liaison officers as part of our diplomatic missions to continue on a continuous basis of military relationship, which would actually add to our diplomatic efforts and diplomatic presence and visibility in Africa. The third point is that Professor Ali Ashraf talked of the role models of USA, UK, Australia, and China. Why was India left out? Our historical defense cooperation has been with India, and perhaps a more decisive one. You talked of Bangoshagar, you talked of Sampriti, but I think that is something that is evolving very closely next to our home. Going back to our issue of establishing our diplomacy, military diplomacy in the African countries, I think Kuwait Punargothan can be used as a template of how we can continue bilateral relationship or strengthen bilateral relationship with countries where we have successful peacekeeping. And I think the issue mentioned by Major General Moinullah Chaudhry about South Sudan is a classic example, that you establish such a goodwill that those host countries want to keep your military people in their onwards. Air Vice Marshal Mahmoud Hassan talked of General MacArthur, but I think it was Admiral Chang He who started the process of military diplomacy in our very region. He visited our parts of the world a number of times. and he talked of the presence of trade as a major instrument of diplomacy. My last point, since I talked of trade, we see global trade routes are now being threatened not only with the geopolitics, but by piracy. And this is going to increase now that the Suez Canal is almost a forbidden area. And if Iran gets deeply involved in the Gaza situation, the Straits of Hormuz will also become. So can our Navy not protect our routes through which our traders go to European countries? Now they have to go through this Cape of Good Hope of South Africa to reach Europe. One of our diplomats posted from Vietnam to a European country had to take the personal effects through the Cape of Good Hope at much greater expense. This will become routine for our trade routes in the future. So maybe we should consider deploying our Navy, which is a very capable Navy, in these areas to protect our traders who use the shipping lines. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Hannan.
Thank you, Chair. Esteemed audience. I must congratulate all four speakers, and all presentation were excellent. I must say thought-provoking, very educative, instructive, and we learned many things in different dimensions of the different diplomacy, the main theme of the day. For the first speaker, I found very interesting element of predictability in different diplomacy. And that is a very crucial element I found very relevant for Bangladesh. And he suggested about the new norms approach of dialogue and shared knowledge, if I clearly understood him. And he also mentioned about the realistic approach of national interest and balance in power. And I believe that it is very well articulated presentation, and the dimension he mentioned is very comprehensive. And in that context, I would like to urge upon the presenter, the first presenter, Professor, to consider accommodating the relevance of Bangladesh in the context of its transformational development, where Bangladesh is leading to. Bangladesh is leading to a smart economy, possibly a niche position in the global arena. And this has been highlighted and argued very well by the recent book edited by Sri Radha, that Bangladesh and its quest for a niche in the global context. This is not a book written by Bangladeshi scholars, rather global scholars, the Americans, Australians, Dutch, the Indians, and others. So we can look into, we should seriously consider of the transformational development of Bangladesh and its aspiration to a niche in the global affairs for its very legitimate kind of a place in the global context. So if we have that aspirational phase, so defense, security automatically comes in. So we must be prepared for that. Are we prepared for that? That is a big question. And the first speaker rightly argued for skilled and professionalism in Bangladesh, in different diplomacy particularly. For example, if I may say, that Asia pivot was highlighted by the Obama administration in 2012. Now you see how things are evolving. A concept of Asian pivot now is destabilizing the overall, the geostrategic order of the globe. And the things are shaping and reshaping in the mechanisms like IPS, like Quad, like AUKUS, like IPEF, and Quad Plus, and again AUKUS Plus, and many other things are unfolding. So what I am suggesting, diplomacy itself by definition is an evolving process. So are we ready to integrate defense diplomacy in the overall architecture of the national diplomacy, what the chair suggested, the national diplomacy? So this must be very futuristic and in the context of the geostrategic kind of orientation and the changes. For the second speaker, I found that Mr. Tarek rightly pointed out that defense diplomacy should be inclusive of both peace and wartime. And I would suggest him, if he kindly consider, to think of involvement and engagement of Bangladesh, very serious engagement of Bangladesh in the regional, bilateral, and multilateral security architectures. So I found some elements possibly not even considered. And our third speaker, and I must salute him for elucidating the contribution of our defense forces engaged in the peacekeeping operations. And the whole nation must be proud of the stellar contributions of the defense forces and the peacekeeping agents, and highlighting and giving an image profile of the country at the global level. I myself, as an ambassador and incidentally as the chair of the International Migration Organization, visited Haiti. I found personally how the ladies officers of the police forces contributed and give a very high profile image of Bangladesh. So this is a very strong element in that area. And I must say that the dimensions the third speaker mentioned about besides the defense element, the overall global situations and the engagement of the peacekeeping operations, a lot of issues like humanitarian issues. And he mentioned about the understanding in forging friendship, cooperation among the 100 and plus more countries in a mechanism. And that is the network, and that is the hallmark of diplomacy for friendship, understanding, networking. And I must say that peacekeeping operation is not a mean idea. There are two elements in the UN system: is peacemaking and peacekeeping. And the speaker very seriously, and it's a kind of a pointer to understand that peacekeeping operation is rather heralding the opportunity for peacemaking. And he mentioned it. And I'm truly delighted seeing this aspect of peacekeeping operation. And the fourth speaker, he although spoke from his heart as a young military officer and then a senior officer. I liked his idea, how to fight for a war and win, and how to contribute to peace. I believe this war and peace, both the elements speaks the entirety of the scope of the defense diplomacy. And he also articulated and identified there must be a balance in theory and practice. And balance not necessarily is very easy. The balance between idealism and realism is not a very easy thing. But the point is, overall, the politicians or the leaders of the country, definitely I'm positive about, they are thinking how the global situation is evolving. So my point is, as an individual, as a retired person now, are we ready to be involved more in terms of security architecture globally, regionally, bilaterally, in line with our foreign policy aspirations? That is an area. And even the government or the policymakers delve in that. We need to develop skill development, need to be resourceful in terms of capacity building, understanding the complexity of the security situation, which is very, I must say, very complex. So I believe the Bangladesh has come to a transition to think of seriously how to be part of that process in terms of inclusivity. We don't want to be passive and reactive for anything happening around in the region or globally. I thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Abdul Hannan. I give the floor to Colonel Shahadat, consultant on China-Bangladesh relations.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Shahadat, retired. Since last few days, I had been studying how China or the Chinese army, PLA, is doing the defense diplomacy. Because since 1988, I had been studying China. And since my retirement, 2008, so I'm instantly studying. I would like to share and then suggest one thing. In China, I vigorously have seen they also have the NDU, Staff College, Military Academy, whatever mechanism we all have. They believe these are for making leaders. But they maintain separate research organization to give inputs to serving military or political or government officials. In our country, whoever is in the power, we are being trained. Then we make decisions. Today, we were very amazed by knowing the history of our defense diplomacy. I'm sure all the audience are amazed. Can we imagine how big this success could be if we could do the same diplomacy through a concerted and continuous process of research? In China, I have visited earlier in 2010 or 11, Academy of World Watch. It is simply a think tank. Chinese government has ensured that 20 big companies are financing, not directly government budget. 20 big companies are sponsoring the Academy of World Watch. I also visited Union University, and then I found there is a complete department who is studying only on BIMSTEC. Very qualified people. So likewise, I will not linger this. I thought of suggesting that for our future strategy, now is the time that Bangladesh seriously thinks of having a research center, may be coordinated or guided by MOFA and AFD, a separate. In Bangladesh now, we have dollar crisis. We have land crisis. But I'm sure audience will agree with me that we are surplus in one thing after these 50 years. Before 20 years, before 30 years, it was not surplus. Now we have enough qualified people who are retired, government officials, military leaders. Other than attending seminars or doing very privately something, we are not using these resources. So we can have a serious think tank which will support the government at a very higher stage and spending a lot of money. One. The second, side by side, we can have a complete department study of defense diplomacy. We call it SDD or we call it DDS, Diplomatic Defense Diplomacy Study, at our Bangladesh University of Professionals, where very qualified, retired defense officers, MOFA officers, and other qualified professors of country may do the research. And there should be heavy funding for this. It's not like other departments of studying international relations or others. It's a very special. So who will give input to existing leaders? So my concrete two suggestion is there may be a serious department in BUP. We call it DDS or SDD, and a separate think tank guided by Armed Forces Division and MOFA. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your suggestion. I have Now two more requests. And at the end, there will be intervention from Lieutenant General Waqiruজ্জামান, Chief of General Staff. So the order will be, I have forgotten the name, one who is requested from behind General Matin. He will be now intervening, and then there will be Major General retired Amsa Amin, and then there will be Lieutenant General Shabbir Ahmed, NDCPSC retired, and General Harun as well. So please, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, distinguished guests. I would not go into the details of the defense diplomacy, which have been talked about here, but I want to just record here that the present government from 1997 till 2001 had started the initiative as a part of the process, and we focused on our immediate neighbor, that is Myanmar. And then this may not be known to many people, but I would like to say that I led that delegation as the GOC of the 24 Infantry Division in 2001, and I had the components, senior officers from the Navy, Air Force, and DGFI, and also we had with us our Armed Forces football team, and it was a part to break the ice between the military relationship that we had, and then we started off, and that was a successful thing. It was a 5-day mission, but we came back after that with the change of the things. What happens in Bangladesh is it is discontinued, and this should have continued. The conflict area that we have, which is of our immediate concern, is Myanmar. So we could have had a better understanding with this thing, and we could have proceeded further. But I think we should continue this, and this is for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Please, sir, the gentleman there. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I have a very small point. As I understand that winning a war is without fighting a war would have been a proper definition of different diplomacy. There are 2 points that has been raised. One is that we are witnessing higher than the increase in military spending than the GDP in South Asia, in certain countries, which indicates a very high degree of militarization. And secondly, there are tensions mounting in the region itself, which points to a core point of having deterrence. And that too requires a kind of a serious discussion on, while we point out the hardware component of the deterrence, but that too also requires a serious understanding on the soft power of the deterrence, which is defense diplomacy. So that really itself requires a serious and thorough understanding if we were to prosper and have a peaceful, secure, prosperous Bay of Bengal. Thank you.
Thank you indeed for your point. I request Major General retired Amsa Amin. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. First thing first, I apologize. I think the first time I got late, awfully late. I'll not make any excuses. I'm really sorry about it. Secondly, I must appreciate BIS for bringing to the forefront the issue of defense diplomacy, or whatever you call military diplomacy. It was needed, and I think the process should continue almost as a permanent feature of our studies. My view is that you cannot separate military or defense diplomacy from other forms of diplomacy, not at all. It's combined diplomacy, political diplomacy, Economic diplomacy, which you talk about, is a big issue. There's a defense economics involved in it. And at the same time, other forms of cultural diplomacy. They all combine into actually bringing up a national strategy, both for security and development. And I'd say, reflecting the views of others, that there should be a center for study in all universities for the study of combined diplomacy. Elements of all should be there, and a continuous process, because political issues and military issues are dominating the world before and now and in future as well. And this knowledge will help, as Dr. Titomer said, winning a war without fighting it. And in fact, this concept was given by Sun Tzu thousands of years ago. The best way to win a war is not to fight it, or with minimum damage, loss of life and other things, destruction. Rajshahi University had a defense studies department by its very name. I discovered it when I was in the military academy. I don't know if Dhaka University ever had one, but these subjects have been highly neglected. I think this can make a recommendation from this study, these presentations today, that this would be taking our understanding of security and development together. Actually, I thank all the presenters. I've learned a lot. I never knew Singapore had such a strong defense posture, deterrence force. You said Jill Moin, you brought it up, yeah? Avia Mahmood. Thank you for it. It's a lesson. We need to study it, how a small nation with a small economy can become big. But the economic study is a vital thing before you can really bring about a deterrence force in the military terms. I have one more point, and that is, wherever there is military interest of Bangladesh, security interest of Bangladesh, I'm not sounding parochial. It should be military diplomats, ambassadors posted there. As speakers have come out very clearly, they know the language of dealing with security issues. Particularly countries like Myanmar, we have huge problem, and it is in a way developing. It's not subsiding. I don't know, we had defense ambassadors in Myanmar before, but it's time that we should have people who can really play a strong role with the military junta. At the same time, they need to have a strong political wing so that it can translate into a peaceful civil rule in future. I think I'll not take more time. And I thank again BIS for bringing it to the forefront. Please take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor goes to Lieutenant General Shafeeq Ahmed. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Let me thank all four speakers for the eloquent and very thought-provoking and informative presentations. Hearing all this thing, I have got a good number of questions, but I'll not put forward at this stage. There is no questions, in fact, but there are some queries. I was involved in this military diplomacy in some form because I was Chief of General Staff of Bangladesh Army. So I had visited many countries to furthering our interest and also establishing greater cooperation between our army and those armies that I visited. There were successes and there were lessons learned, and I'm very proud of it. And then I feel that I was a contributing member to start the process, and it was very extensive in that regard. Well, Now, on the defense diplomacy, although I had a number of questions, but very short questions, or the queries or the explanatory lead to get some answers, or for the panelists to think or ponder on certain points. First, I would go to the professor, Ali Ashraf. You talked about the IPS and the BRI and under the global environment at this stage, and the things as much that are happening around the world, and then IPS and BRI becoming contesting to each other. Now it's very precarious for Bangladesh to get some exact position in this regard. And how would we sail through these two and still maintain our own standing? And then I would come to another point. There was a few years back, this pertains to the BIISS initiative. There is a International Peace Academy or something like that. Then there is office in Agarga. And when it started, I, along with our then CGS, Lieutenant General Moinul, when he was in AFD, we were deeply involved. And then the chairman, and then the DG was General Rahman. So we were very deeply involved, and we were working for 5-6 months. So much of our success in the United Nations, and so much we are proud of our activities in United Nations. And we can give forward the thoughts and the knowledge to our next generation or anyone else. And even when we compete in the UN opportunities or the job vacancies, the way that we should present ourselves, we should make our credentials, the way we know about the country, those countries where our peacekeepers served. And that facilities and all of a sudden is come to a standstill, and it's not seeing any light in that one. And I would request BIISS to look into the matter and to reinvigorate it for the sake of the country. It's not a one's domain, not in the foreign ministry, not in the military, but it is the country establishment, and we should see that it furthers and for the benefit of resource development. And the third, I have a request to the respected Chief of Army Staff and also the Chief of General Staff that if it is possible at this stage, we as we have seen that our United Nations involvement has increased manifold, and then we established our OO Directorate. And since the knowledge and the best practices that we have, and also we were trying to further our participation and impact in the United Nations, can we have a department in this Army headquarters who will observe, coordinate, and accumulate the best practices and the way that our participation can increase more, and then research oriented, as the Shahadat was also talking about it. So that kind of small things, may it be all serving officers, or it can be the experts, those who deem fit to take on the assignments. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I request now General Harun, sir, for intervention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I thank BISS for organizing this particular seminar. I think it's the first of its kind in the existence of the country. Though it is one of the very important, vital issue for the country, it took us 53 years to realize that we need to have something. Heartiest congratulations to BISS. In the same context, I would also like to congratulate the presenter, particularly Professor Ashraf, Samuel, General Moin, and also Air Marshal Mahmood. First two presenters obviously gave us the theoretical aspect of the defense diplomacy, but very specific, General Moin and Air Marshal Mahmood, I would like to congratulate them to bring it to the notice of the nation that the military has been contributing on the military diplomacy since its inception in 1973. And since then it continued. Let us
agree on one fact, that the Bangladesh Army's involvement in the peacekeeping operation, I say peacekeeping in the hill tract and the saving the country at that time brought us to the present day's expertise on the peacekeeping. What is peace? Someone has said that the militarization, I'd say that like this, military not only fights a war, military also prevents a war. There has been many, many examples of how military has prevented the war. Anyway, now my suggestion is that individually, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Armed Forces are contributing to the national interest in different fields. Military defense forces have been participating in the peacekeeping operations as highlighted in the presentation from East Timor to Haiti. So all continents of the globe have been traveled by the Bangladeshi forces and Bangladeshi personnel. Same case, our if we see this, our trade and commerce is going on, and nowadays Bangladeshi product can be found in anywhere in the global world. Wherever you go, you'll find something Bangladeshi. But now question comes, could we have done better? Now, during my stay in the army, I had the opportunity of serving as a military director, director of military operations, then chief of general staff, then of course the chief of army staff. So having gone through all the three staff appointments, my experience said that we needed lack of coordination between the service providers. So as a result, we established a coordination cell between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Army headquarters. The Army headquarters was the Director of Military Operation, and at the Foreign Ministry, it was the Director of UN. At that time, Ambassador Humayun Kabir was the Director, and I was the Director of Military Operation. We used to have a coordination meeting every month regularly, and if need be, at any time at 24 hours notice. That was the time that military started contributing troops one after the other. And at that time, probably we had about 11 missions going across the world. And Army headquarters had to control 24 hours because somewhere it is in the morning, somewhere it is in the evening, somewhere it is night, somewhere it is day. So 11 missions starting from Cambodia to Sierra Leone, Haiti has completed at that time. It was very, very difficult task. So this unit, which had the coordination effect, we had tremendous result. Deployment in Haiti had to be done in 72 hours. Unimaginable. How can it happen? It happened, and the Bangladesh Armed Forces did it. In 72 hours, troops flown out from Bangladesh for Haiti. So that was the achievement. As we have gone through the missions for long years, since 1988 or 87 till today, our missions have completed with a big thumb. Even American had to take the protection of the Bangladesh Army to get away from the Somalia. If there was no Bangladesh Army, American Army could not have boarded the ships and the launches that they were escaping. So Bangladesh took the pride of protecting the American forces. How could Bangladesh do it? Because Bangladesh achieved the confidence of the Somalian that we are not against the Somalian interest, but whereas the Americans were against the Somalian interest. So that achievement is also there with Bangladesh. My question comes now that as we are contributing in so many fields, our achievements are not being followed up to fulfill the climax of our achievement. For example,
in missions that we have participated where other countries participated, particularly in our neighbor like India, we have seen the Indian contribution or Indian units are dependent for logistic to the Indian supply system. And United Nations encourages to have your own supply system so that your ethnic requirements are fulfilled. Because Bangladeshi soldier does not eat bread and butter, they eat rice and curry. The contractor cannot supply you the rice and curry unless there is a Bangladeshi contractor. However, we have not been able to do that. If we have started building that logistic system when our forces were there, probably today we would have a better business environment in those areas. Because the country or the host country leadership welcomes us. But our businessmen have failed. So there is a sort of a vacuum. On one side achievement, on the other side no follow-up. Do you think there is a need now a national coordination body, whether we call it a National Security Council or National Coordination Council, whatever it is, so that all these can be brought together and the agile results for the national aim or objectives could be achieved better? I think if we have some national body, the Chief of Army Staff is here, CGS is here, probably we can think about it, how we can get the best result out of it. Now, what Moin has said, that if the country is offering a free land for your mission, maybe today it is not that beneficial, but after 20 years or after 30 years, that will be a very bright position for the Bangladesh. So please think about it, whether we need the some sort of a body, whether we call it a Security Council, National Security Council, or National Coordination Body, even the crisis control management, whatever it is, but at the national level, I think we need it. Thank you very much for giving me this floor.
Thank you, sir. We are towards the close of the open discussion. I'd now request Lieutenant General Waqaruzzaman, the CGS. The floor is yours, sir.
Hello. Hey. Hello. 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 Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I was PSOFD for more than 3 years, where all these defense diplomacy I used to deal with. One of my major responsibility was the conducting the defense diplomacy in regards to the other countries. And then for a few months, I'm CGS. So in these two appointments, I'll just share my experience with you. In regards to defense diplomacy, I can assure you that AFD had the intimate connection, close liaison always with Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There might be some misunderstanding about the defense diplomacy, but there is no doubt in my mind that our diplomats, they do very well understand the necessity and importance of defense diplomacy. Whenever any diplomats are being deployed abroad, they used to come and visit my office. We used to discuss many issues. And used to also coordinate liaison with the foreign missions in regards to the defense diplomacy, even for the purpose of procurement. We used to communicate that these are the military hardware that we are going to procure from this country, so that they can achieve some diplomatic leverage from it. Diplomats used to visit my office very frequently. Had there been any problem in regards to the other diplomatic issues, they used to come and suggest me, okay, you buy this or you don't buy this, then we can put pressure. We can take the diplomatic leverage from it. And AFD, what used to do, we used to have very close liaison with the foreign countries. The diplomats, the ambassadors used to visit my office frequently. We used to discuss many issues with the foreign secretary. Unfortunately, he's not here. We conduct joint exercises with many countries, with USA, with India, China. We have a very good relation with India. We have a good relation with USA, China, Russia, and we are doing a wonderful balancing job, right, sitting in AFD. Because we have a strength. Our Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, he framed our foreign policy. Malice to all, friendship to all, malice to none. And that is why, that is the strength we have. And we have been doing a great job, actually, so far, in regards to balancing our relation with all these countries. We are doing great. And sometimes people say that our achievement from UN mission, our military has a significant achievement in Africa, in many countries, particularly South Sudan, Sierra Leone. But unfortunately, diplomats could not take on from them. That is why we lost many opportunities in regards to our investment, particularly in Africa, getting the economic benefit from it. And definitely, I suppose that the diplomats, it was their responsibility to take on from us and do the rest. But nevertheless, it is not all lost. And we are doing, as of now, my experience says that we are doing great in regards to the defense diplomacy, and our diplomats do really understand the necessity, the importance of defense diplomacy, and we are doing a relatively good job. But there are scopes for improvement, of course. So this is what just I thought that I must share with you, because so long, mostly, it was all theoretical discussions were going on. On practice, what all are going on, I just gave you some light in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words and giving us an overview of what we're already engaged in. Now, it gives me the honor of requesting our chief guest today, General S.M. Shafiuddin Ahmed, the Chief of Army Staff, Bangladesh Army, to deliver his address. Sir.
Is it a warning? I don't know. Should I continue? What did DG say? Actually, as I speak now, I see the time. You are destined to have your lunch at this moment as per the program. I was just checking at 12:30 was the lunch time. So when people are ready to take lunch and at that point of time is standing to speak, it's really a word challenge. And hungry person is always an angry person. So should I take a risk? DG, what do you say? But I was allotted with 20 minutes time. And I think I take that opportunity to speak, and I beg apology for this situation for which I think I am not responsible. I reached on time over here. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. The chairman of Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies, Ambassador AFM Gausul Azam Sharkar, the Director General of Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies, distinguished panelists, intellectually very enlightened audience present here, the ex-Chief of Army Staff, the former member of governing bodies of BIS and the Chief of the General Staff, and the present General Staff, Chief of the General Staff, Bangladesh Army, who is also a member of the governing body of BIS, and distinguished learned audience, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I am really happy today to be present here. I have been invited to be the chief guest here by the DG, and I felt I'll take this opportunity. Not only that, not for that, I thought I am expert on the subject. It's not that. For two reasons, I accepted this invitation. First, my association with this institution. I was a DG of this institution. And second, while you talk about defense diplomacy, so I thought it's a learning platform for me as Chief of Army Staff. If I can get some insight from here, it will be useful. On these two contexts, I have accepted. And thank you, DG and the Chairman, for your kind invitation to be a chief guest here. I really feel happy and honored. And on that context, I'll also take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Prime Minister, who has vested me with the responsibility of Chief of Army Staff. As such, I could enjoy this honor today. But no denying fact, I feel really blessed and express my gratitude to Almighty for keeping all of us healthy and allowing us to gather here in this environment and exchange ideas on an important issues. Before I speak any further, I'll take this opportunity to pay gratitude to our father of the nation, the main architect of our independence, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, for his lifelong sacrifice for our independence. At the same time, I'll take this opportunity to pay tribute to our all 3 million martyrs for their supreme sacrifice made for our country. At the same time, gratitude to all the valiant freedom fighters for their contribution. A special tribute to all the fallen members of Bangladesh Defense Forces, who not only laid their lives during Liberation War, but also thereafter in different occasions in home and abroad. Our deepest condolences for the families, and may Almighty grant them the divine Jannah. I'd also like to thank the DG for selecting this topic, which really rose interest, and I think it's a very pertinent topic. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their real contribution and educating all of us with a topic which I think for a military person, we always look forward to learn more. I would like to actually share one of my experience, because while we had been talking about the military diplomacy, the participants of military forces in the UN peacekeeping mission has come up quite prominently. And I was very fortunate to take part a number of times in UN peacekeeping operation. The most challenging and rewarding was for me to be the pioneer deputy force commander in the most challenging mission in the whole world when it was in embryonic stage. It was a mission in Central African Republic, and there I went from this institution. So after becoming DG of this institution, offer came. So I was nominated to appear interviews and tests. And subsequently I qualified and I went there. So it was a very learning ground for me because many of you may not know. I went to the mission in 2014. It was month of September. The mission started on 15 September 2014, but I went 4 days before starting of the mission because to start with the formalities of the mission. On 9th October 2014, I was ambushed over there. And for the first time, fortunately for me, I was having a armored car. That's been a bulletproof vehicle. Being shot, also grenade being launched, still I survived. But unfortunately, some soldiers, not from Bangladesh, other countries, had to give their life and few got injured, including Bangladeshi peacekeepers, because all the vehicles were not bulletproof. So while we were in this situation, the focus was on all of us to actually protect ourselves first, then materialize the mandate given to us, the protection of civilian and all other things coming subsequently. In the UN context, with my experience, there is always a challenging situation. You will see if you're especially holding a senior appointment over there. Sometimes the interest of the UN and the national interest. Being a UN leader, it is your duty to become very impartial. And those who like us, many of you have heard about our peacekeepers, but those who do not know, for them, I'd like to share one information, like General Harun was, and I was, or General Mainullah was. We are recruited by the UN headquarters, and we worked as UN permanent staff. And our peacekeepers, mostly they are not UN permanent staff. They are sent from Bangladesh on the contract basis. Bangladesh government pays them, and UN pays some amount to the Bangladesh government. And our salary was directly from the UN headquarters. So we were to give a lot of undertaking, including that we are not taking anything from Bangladesh, so that we are not biased for anything, and we take right decision, which is good for United Nations. So keeping that thing in mind, but still you, as an individual, always think of your national interest. It doesn't ever go out of your head. So in that scenario, after a few days or few months, when we got stabilized a little, I engaged the government over there at that time, and I'm sure some of those who are there in Central Africa, they will be remembering. It was Mr. Joseph Yakute, Defense Minister then, and Mr. Francisco Tudela, the president who became president after Catherine Samba-Panza, who was the caretaker president. So by virtue of my presence over there for about 2 years, I could grow good relation with them. So when he became president, then subsequently, a lot of advantages started taking place for us. And as you will be knowing that some of the military officers are being trained in Bangladesh, and the initiative started from there. Inshallah, within a few weeks, I think, if I cannot make time, the Chief of the General Staff will go to Central African Republic and we are going to hand over them few thousands pair of uniform for the Central African Army, SPACA, and other support that we can give, only to ensure that the government is very friendly to Bangladesh. Because there are a lot of effort which you can, diplomatic and non-diplomatic, to get some countries out of the mission, some countries in, and all these things happens. Being in Bangladesh, is my core interest to see that the Bangladeshis are there and the host countries are critical. So it is imperative for all UN peacekeeping forces to maintain a very good relation with the host countries. And those things which started in 2014 is paying it now. So whatever you may name it, military diplomacy or whatever it is, every time I heard that someone, somewhere, they are trying to define an officer and the responsibility of some headquarter or sub-ministry or who should be doing this diplomacy. But as I understand, it's clearly spelled out in our foreign policy dictum by our father of the nations: friendship to all, malice towards none. And if you are trying to maintain friendship, so what is the scope? Absolutely. Engagement, friendly engagement, and that is, you may term it diplomacy and whatever it is. But I am quite sanguine that all of us, we are doing all the organs, are doing everything that is congruent to implement this foreign policy. The military, we have multifaceted and whole range of engagement. So you just cannot name one after another. There's a lot of things which cannot be also articulated, but we do it. And that fetches benefit. To my understanding, this diplomacy is nothing but is an effort by any member of a country with a foreign country to achieve national interest by any form. You are going to define, you can define in so many ways. I have even seen that there is a sports diplomacy. Some say economic diplomacy, some say dollar diplomacy, gunboat diplomacy, and there are so many names. But I just would like to give an example that when I met Chief of Staff of Qatar Armed Forces, so I just made initially friendship. Then I offered him to be the chief guest in Bangladesh's military academy's passing out parade. I just wanted to give him an honor and thereby give an impression that how competent Bangladesh Army is in different fields. And we have an interest. Because Qatar is a country who employs a lot of foreigners in different fields. So having a good relation with be only in the interest of Bangladesh. So when he came, and he was so happy, so with his own aircraft, he gave us 18 Arabian horse, which are very, very expensive. And those are needed for Bangladesh Army in military academy. And we had to spend good amount of money to get them. So an effort which ultimately was in the interest of Bangladesh. And I think if we can term the national interest, the priority will be, I think, in Bangladesh's context, the sustained economic development with maintaining the national security will be our prime national interest. So whatever we do to achieve that, I think is all in falling in the same line. Traditionally, classically, Bangladesh I can talk about Bangladesh Army. I think it's same for our defense forces. Do it perform 5 tasks, 5 roles. The first, it is our duty to defend our motherland, maintain sovereignty of the country, and we remain prepared for that. Second, in aid to civil power, we do a lot of nation building activities. Third, in aid to civil power, we do disaster management. And this disaster management sometimes go beyond our national boundary. And we had the scope of contributing our militaries in disaster management. China, India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Philippines, Kuwait, and there could be few names as well. Turkey, very recently. So we do it. The fourth, in aid to civil power also, we do some internal security duties that we do in Chittagong Hill Tracts as well as the other district of the countries where it is needed. And the fifth thing that we do is our overseas employment. And it's not limiting to only, though the major is the UN peacekeeping operation, but beyond that also, we have heard about the employment of our people in Kuwait. In Kuwait, as you know that it will be more than 5,000, more than 5,500 forces are employed, but all of them are not military. So we have employed good number of civilians over there, police personnel, and Navy Air Force is also there. Though it is known to be Army unit, but we have element of this. So a lot of employment opportunities of our civilians are also over there. Good number, huge number. So this is also a contribution in achieving our national interest, which I think you can term it as military diplomacy if you wish to say. But as I say, I'm not very much fond of defining in so many ways. I saw that Professor Ashraf saw a definition where it was written as civilian or a military person engaging about military topic becomes, I think, the military diplomacy. But what happens when a military person, he engages himself about, as we have done so far, I've been giving examples, so non-military affairs, finding opportunity for our business opportunities, finding opportunities for our manpower export and all these things. These are not military affairs, but done by the military contingents or military leaders can also be a part of military diplomacy. So not only limiting to military topics, also something else could be. So while we have military engagement, keeping in mind to achieving our national interest, is any action to me is military diplomacy. As you have heard that Bangladesh is the largest troops contributor in the UN peacekeeping operations. And out of those peacekeepers, more than 90% is from Bangladesh Army. So very often I have to interview the contingent commanders and sometimes talking to the contingents. And while we are in military peacekeeping missions, every time we talk to our peacekeepers, one sentence is quite common while we advise at any level. That remember, while you are doing this mission, you are also an ambassador of Bangladesh. This is very popular and very commonly said. So do not do anything which defame Bangladesh. Do everything that brings name and fame for Bangladesh. That's mean the soft power. And that helps for subsequent engagement of Bangladesh to that country for the benefit of Bangladesh. So these are inbuilt. This has not started now. It is there. And as you have heard that the defense policy, which was formulated by our father of the nation in 1974, and finally articulated in 2018, has given a clear guideline of our engagement in achieving this national interest that you might call defense diplomacy or military diplomacy. While I visit the UN headquarters, I really feel honored and proud of our men that we have a special place over there, and everybody recognizes us by the top or the premier peacekeepers of the globe. And we are proud of that. And that drives us to put better effort in improving in those affairs. The one point has been, I think, spelled out number of times in different form, and I do strongly would like to agree on that. From the national interest or national strategy, the military strategy will come, and that formulates our approach to different countries or different issues. So in isolation, it cannot be done. So while we have a feeling sometimes who takes the lead or who should be in control, there comes a little problem. I think at one point General Sabri was saying about the Peace Institute, who take lead and who should be the most appropriate authority to deal with it. Again, somewhere it was spelled out that, and I strongly, this was also on my note, that in many engagements, while you start, but cannot finish because this doesn't remain in the military domain anymore. While I find an opportunity for a business sector, then subsequently it has to go to the ministries. So I have a feeling that I think, as had been suggested, there could be a body for ensuring a concerted effort that something which have been achieved is not lost, is followed up. And how to do it, we can always give suggestion, but I think as think tank, Bangladesh Institute of International Strategic Studies, with your lesson that you have learned today, you can always suggest a modality in the foreign ministry as well. So I think with our constant effort, somewhere we'll find a light to work in a better environment. There is no denying fact that all the organ of the government is working in achieving national interest. It is only better to find opportunities or most conducive environment to work together. It is impossible to succeed alone. And how to collaborate, that is the challenge. And I think while we discuss to find ways to improve, we'll be able to do that. There could be many suggestions which cannot be openly discussed, and there could be something which you can take it separately as well. Another issue I felt is important for us to note. The military diplomacy, as you say, there is an example of our IPAMs and other international engagement, global engagement that has been significantly contributing in the whole military diplomacy. IPAMS was conducted by Bangladesh Army in 2022, and 2023 it was India I was having the opportunity to be there as well. So what I'm trying to say is that 22 Bangladesh, 23 India, 24 Australia. But one thing is very common is co-host is United States of America. And they bear the most of the budget. So they are spending good amount of money to enhance their areas of engagement, influence, and cooperation. So if you really want to, actually Bangladesh would like to also enhance, no denying fact, we need to increase our capability by putting more resources and budget. We know how to do it, but at the same time, we should have the capability to do it. You can be the best scholar of the country to become a diplomat or foreign, but it will not work until your country has something to offer physically on. So becoming, a spokesperson of a first world country and a spokesperson of a third world country is not same because of the profile of the country. So if we want to enhance our ability over there, our capacity over there, we need to invest. That is one of my suggestions. There was a suggestion about Myanmar, that whether we have a scope to engage more with Myanmar military leaders and all these things to reduce them. Actually, we have our engagement and we do everything to do, but some of the Myanmar military leaders, they have international sanction. So there is a risk of, putting ourselves into trouble while you do that, because all of us are our friend. So to make one friend happy, then we cannot antagonize another one. So it's a dynamics that we have to look into it. And at the same time, the practical connotation has to be taken into consideration. And I would like to ascertain that we are doing our best and we are on the right track. There was a suggestion that whether Army headquarters can have a directorate or some office which will deal with foreign affairs only. Basically, we have, not in the form of naming it in Office of Military Foreign Affairs or something like that, but we have our Directorate of Overseas Operation. We have our Directorate of Staff Duties. They engage the foreign missions, the foreign exercises. We have our military directorate. So we do differently through different directorates, but we have designated people to work for this engagement with our friendly countries. But however, we are restructuring our forces, taking the global changes into considerations, our organigram also being reconstructed, where we have we are keeping this suggestion in mind. Another proposal was to have a think tank absolutely dedicated, think on these issues of military diplomacy in Army headquarters or other places. It's my feeling that probably the institution like NDC, staff colleges, would be the better places or having this Army headquarters, because Army headquarters is a place where normally, due to the practical reason, we would like to have as less as retired people or the other civilians coming in. If you are talking about a research institute or talking about a think tank where people should be working for a very, very long period. But while you are in service, especially in the military, it is a place, it's an organization of, where every individual has to be posted after 2 to 3 years after serving in an on appointment. This is in Army rules instructions. Other than instructional appointment, which can be extended up to 5 years. So if you are growing an expert on some issues and you will be posted after 2 years, you cannot be an expert. And all military leaders are designed to fight and work for Bangladesh Army. So to become a commander of your men, you need to also have diversified experience. So that puts a challenge. So there is no alternative but to have permanent people over there. We need to employ civilian and retired people. That is, and that can be done while they are in the other institutions. Like already we have employed few in the National Defense College. We can do it in the Staff College and MIST in other places who can work with the institution and at the same time can build on their research and subsequently produce their product, which can be processed through Army headquarters and other places for subsequent foreign policy or any policy implementation. Bangladesh Army has contributed. I just gave an example that very soon CGS will go to Central Africa to hand over a few thousand pairs of our uniform to them. And also we are giving some other gears to some of the countries. And we have Bangladesh Army has, we have indigenously produced some remotely operated vehicle, which is a good innovation for Bangladesh Army. And thus we are saving a lot of foreign currency, which earlier we needed to import these equipments. And these equipment, some of them we are going to hand over to the Peruvian Army also very soon. So this will also help us in growing our relation, especially in the context of UN peacekeeping, because this initiative came in while we had been discussing one of the platform where the peace, the member state can help each other in capacity building. So Bangladesh said that we will be doing this for Peruvian Army. So it's giving one insight to many that Bangladesh is capable also in contributing not only in the form of peacekeeper troops, also in the other form. We also did same with Gambia. We have agreed to give some of the equipments and things to Gambian Army, and thereby we will have in future joint forces operating, Gambian and Bangladesh Army together in UN peacekeeping operations. We have also handed over few military vehicles to Maldives armies. We have, I'm not going to name, we are doing this thing very regularly. So we are in the right track, I think. Inshallah, we'll be not failing in discharging our duties. As said, I think I'd like to reiterate before I end that military personnel, they don't not only learn how to fight a war, but also how to prevent or avoid a war to achieve our national interest. At the higher level, it is taught. NDCs are never aimed to teaching you the art of warfare, rather how to avoid war or how to enhance your diplomatic capabilities. But at the same time, we never forget the main role of the military forces is to protect the sovereignty of the country. That is our primary goal. And we should be ready in doing that. intention can change overnight, but capabilities doesn't change overnight. You are my friend today. What happens if you are not my friend tomorrow? So we should be capable of defending our national interest, our motherland, and be capable of. But the main foreign policy dictum, as I have explained, has set every tone for us. And we are doing everything. And I would like to give you a word that as Chief of Bangladesh Army is doing everything in contributing in achieving that foreign policy. And wherever there is an opportunity, whether it is told or untold, we grab and do everything so that it only fetches benefit for Bangladesh. And Bangladesh become Sonar Bangla as dreamed by our father of the nation. Thank you very much. Joy Bangla.
Thank you indeed, Honorable Chief Guest, for your very comprehensive statement. And also thank you for giving response to some of the questions coming from the floor. And you have really broadened our understanding about the topic and provided useful guidelines on what Bangladesh has so far done, what more can be and needs to be done in this still growing and diversifying field. I'm going to take the floor from the podium for my concluding remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, in fact, after a long seminar, we don't have much to be said anymore, but just few remarks. From this seminar, and particularly from the speech of the Honorable Chief Guest, we have, it has been made amply clear that military diplomacy is very crucially important for Bangladesh. And in fact, it started from the very beginning with our father of the nation's calls for struggle for independence and freedom, when in fact our mix of civilian and military people, they conducted defense diplomacy along with offensive defense with defensive defense. It started both. And actually, defense diplomacy or military diplomacy has become all the more important now. First of all, for upholding the primary requirement of peace and stability of Bangladesh in a world of uncertainties. And then for maintaining an ecology of friendship, international understanding, and cooperative relations so as to allow Bangladesh to pursue its national goals, including our global integration and national development. And that particularly in the context of evolving and often disruptive geopolitical developments, as well as emerging new domains of diplomacy and defense, such as cyber, data, information, international politics of debt, public diplomacy, and also strategic application of economic policy, technology, culture, and soft power. The government has used with its limited resources defense diplomacy as a specialized tool of national diplomacy and has attained some successes, which our distinguished and learned presenters and distinguished participants have highlighted. The world today is witnessing emerging and unconventional threats and conflicts exposing vulnerabilities of developing countries like Bangladesh. Asymmetric warfare, hybrid conflicts, cyber attacks, non-state and proxy forces involvement, forcible displacement, brinkmanship and destabilizing rhetoric. All these new issues bring us the realization of the need for more integration into our foreign policy of defense diplomacy, along with the economic diplomacy that we have been focusing for years. These provide actually new context and necessity of our defense diplomacy and pursue Bangladesh's foreign policy goals thereby. We need to harness full potential of our military diplomacy as it is not merely an option for us now, but a strategic imperative. The seminar has given us some important recommendations and ideas, and also suggestions of strategies. And of course, those include, importantly, enhancement of soft power and outreach, as defense diplomacy is an essential component of our national soft power to shape our narratives and enhance its positive impact. And also in that context, he will be developing considered mechanisms and pathways for effective defense diplomacy and for civil-military collaboration and synergy for greater efficacy of our defense diplomacy in particular and national diplomacy in general. Certainly, BIISS will compile recommendations and suggestions coming from this seminar and will submit those for consideration of the authorities. Dear participants, we hope that the defense diplomacy discourse will continue beyond this seminar. Our forward thinking will crystallize, and we will find concrete ideas, means and mechanisms, and strategic initiatives to spearhead our defense diplomacy in the high foreign policy and national interest of Bangladesh. By revamping existing tools, adopting new techniques, and acknowledging defense diplomacy as an area of expertise, we can safeguard our sovereignty, promote peace, and contribute to global security better. Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's diplomacy is comprehensive, and practice is pragmatic and suitable to needs within the foreign policy constant given by our father of the nation, friendship to all and malice towards none. And now to conclude, it is my pleasure and duty to thank everyone. May I extend our very special thanks and gratitude to our chief guest of today, General S.M. Shafiuddin Ahmed, Chief of Army Staff, Bangladesh Army, for taking time out of his very busy schedule and gracing the program. I also thank the distinguished presenters for their excellent deliberations. And in this context particularly recognize and thank the defense attaches of some of the important countries who are present here and participants, distinguished participants in this seminar for active participation and interventions and contribution. We thank you for your suggestions, and I thank everyone else, including the staff and my colleagues from the BIISS, who have worked hard to make all arrangements in successfully hosting the program today. Thank you all. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, may Bangladesh live forever. Thank you. With this,